Eddie Alvarez vs. Conor McGregor. 10 of the worst performances ever turned in by a challenger or champion in a UFC title fight. And what better place to begin than with a horrendous UFC 205 showing from the great Eddie Alvarez. Taking on Conor McGregor is no easy feat. The Notorious brings a certain level of public attention and scrutiny onto his opponents that you just cannot hide from. And boy, did Eddie look like he was feeling the pressure on fight night. His wrestling was virtually non-existent. His own offense was practically useless, and every time he tried to move forward, Conor would land with a huge shot in response, dropping the Underground King 4 times in total, including the second-round TKO finish. Alvarez is an undeniable great of the 155-pound weight class, but he truly looked lost on this night. In a game as volatile as mixed martial arts, one bad decision can have career-altering ramifications, and for the women's MMA icon Kat Zingano, the decision to jump headfirst into the fire with a prime Ronda Rousey left her with a slice of history she'd rather have avoided. Rousey's judo and her ability to latch onto her signature armbar were truly unstoppable at this point in time, and once Zingano made contact, Rousey was able to instantly take over, locking onto Kat's arm for the tap in just 14 seconds. It remains the fastest championship submission in UFC history, and to be honest, we're not sure if that's a record we'll ever see beaten. A quick knockout is one thing, but it takes a certain level of recklessness to get yourself submitted in such rapid fashion. But we couldn't mention Ronda Rousey's highs without discussing her truly dismal lows. And spoiler alert, there's more than one of them on this list. Rousey's title-losing performance against the Preacher's daughter, Holly Holm, was one of those fights that really made you wonder how we could have been so wrong about a fighter. Sure, Holm brought an elite boxing game and some very effective kickboxing to the women's bantamweight division, but over the course of the 2 rounds this fight lasted, Ronda was made to look laughably bad on the feet. This was an expert striker against a total novice. Very rarely do we see a once-feared champion stock drop like this. The Rousey fear factor died as soon as we saw Holm land that infamous head kick, and it never did return. For Rousey's second appearance on this video, we have to take a look at her final ever matchup, a performance that somehow makes the Holm loss seem pretty decent by comparison. Because when Ronda stepped in there with Amanda Nunes, she literally acted as a punching bag for the Lioness, showing absolutely nothing in response. Nunes hit her, and Rousey flailed around the cage wildly for a few exchanges before the referee jumped in and mercifully saved her from an even worse fate. This might just be the most embarrassing attempt at fighting in UFC history, but we'll leave that up to you. Remember, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to leave a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss a single upload. We nearly went with Stipe vs. Francis 1 for this pick, but for as bad as Ngannou was made to look in their first fight, at least he tried to win in round 1 and then survived until the very end. Stipe in this heavyweight rematch barely threw anything in the opening round. Then after finally hurting his opponent in the second, he ran directly into a hard Ngannou counter and got put out cold. Look, we love Miocic as much as anyone, but this was a dismal performance, and proof that his trilogy with Daniel Cormier had taken more wind out of his sails than most people realized. Ngannou fought beautifully, of course, but this was a surprisingly gun-shy performance from the most decorated champion in UFC heavyweight history. Is it fair to put Israel Adesanya's title-losing performance against Sean Strickland in the same category as some of these other ones? Well, in our book, it most certainly is. Strickland didn't out-wrestle this former kickboxing elite or catch him with a random lucky punch. No, Strickland beat Stylebender in his own greatest area of mixed martial arts, and did it to such a degree that Izzy looked out of this fight before the 25 minutes had even finished. Strickland beat one of the best strikers in MMA history by standing in front of him and piling on the pressure. Did Adesanya have the wrong game plan? Did he perhaps take Strickland lightly? Maybe. But that doesn't change the fact that this was a terrible performance from a huge betting favorite in a fight that he was backed to dominate from a stylistic standpoint. Rose Namajunas is one of the greatest women fighters of all time, but man, you can't look at this strawweight icon's career without mentioning some of the strange moments that it contains. Getting slammed on your head by Jessica Andrade is one thing, but the way we see it, Thug Rose's worst moment in the cage was her truly awful 5-round showing against Carla Esparza in their rematch. Namajunas set a pace early on that turned this potentially interesting matchup into one of the most boring title fights in the history of the sport. Virtually nothing happened for most of this one, with Esparza taking home a decision win on the scorecards. But then, in another shocking twist, Namajunas started acting as if her strategy had worked to a T, wondering out loud how the judges and the fans didn't notice how perfectly it all went. Yeah, this was a bad night for Team Namajunas on all fronts. Calling Michael Bisping's left hook shot that stunned Luke Rockhold the result of a bad performance from the champ is maybe a step too far. But let's get one thing straight about the UFC 199 headliner. Luke Rockhold came in way too confident for his own good, arrogant even, and the way he carried himself during the opening exchanges of this fight were indicative of a man who was not taking his opponent seriously. Rockhold had already dominated Bisping in their first fight, so why should he fear the count this time around? Well, he got a pretty comprehensive answer to that question early on. Rockhold's chin got tagged, Bisping moved in for the kill, and with that, one of the biggest upsets in UFC history took place. You could just tell how invested Dana White and his team were in the rising talent that was Darren Till prior to his first and only shot at UFC gold. Till was good, sure, but part of the reason that Dana and company wanted this charismatic young Englishman to rise up and win the strap was due to the presence of one of the most divisive champions the sport has ever known. Tyron Woodley was not beloved by the fans, nor was he loved by the promotion. Till was the exciting new prospect on the scene, and the UFC president made no attempts to hide just how intrigued he was by the prospect of a fresh new champion. But Tyron Woodley would not be so easily brushed aside, and after Till came out there and threw virtually nothing in this fight, Woodley dropped him with a huge power shot and proceeded to lock up a Darce choke. It's not like Till was doing too much wrong in this one, it's more that he did absolutely nothing at all. And finally, we gotta give Shogun Rua a bit of a break here. It's not easy to step in there for a title defense against probably the most naturally talented fighter to ever do it, but even with that being the case, it's not often you see a champion get so thoroughly dominated physically, strategically, and technically the way that Shogun did when he took on John Jones. This was like watching the future of MMA playing out before our very eyes, a glimpse into where the sport was going, and Shogun, despite having great heart and grit, had absolutely nothing for Jones in there. Every takedown was simple, the ground and pound was vicious, and on the feet, Jones's ability to fire off single-shot strikes with a high degree of variation left the Brazilian guessing wrong in every exchange. By the time the ref moved in to call this off, Shogun was already tapping on the mat in submission, a thorough beatdown from John Bones Jones. If you enjoyed today's video, show your support by leaving a like and a comment before subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any content week to week.